Okay, a warm welcome to everybody. We now have Dr. Somak Raychaudhury as our principal panelist. You can see him here. Tathagata and I will be co-moderating the panel. So we received your questions in the surveys and we have a discussion as how to go about it. So we came to the decision that it would be effective if we could start talking about our experiences and why did we decide to do what choices we had taken to stay in the UK or go to the US. So we will start off with Somak sir, who will tell us about his decisions and why he made them.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everybody. So let's see. Where do I start? So I think the focus of today's discussion, there are two things. One is, of course, how one can look for at least the beginning of the career, look for a PhD position, and subsequent research studying positions in Europe. And secondly, then what does it mean in terms of a career beyond, right? So, this is a vast topic, of course. And so let's hope we can at least start off discussing in the panel, and then we can take questions. I suppose most of the people who are attending are in a stage where they are thinking of applying in the next couple of years, or at various levels. Let me start by talking about myself. Just giving an outline of my career. Of course, this career I'm going to talk about, started about 30 years ago. So some of it is irrelevant because things have changed quite a bit, but some of it hasn't really. So I went abroad to England first in 1984. So that's quite a long time ago. But 1984 and then I went to England partly because I went right after my BSc. Now this option is still there. I went after my BSc at Presidency College and I got the INLAC scholarship, which still exists. And we'll talk about it when we talk about funding. Got the INLAC scholarship, and at that point, INLAC scholarship gave you scholarships to go to England and to go to Oxford and Cambridge at that point. Now it's opened up to Imperial College and various other places. And at that point, the admission to the university was a part of this scholarship, because the people from Oxford and Cambridge used to come to India to interview. So I was interviewed in Kolkata, for example, by Colin Lucas, who later became the Vice Chancellor of Oxford. And then an interview in Delhi. Now it is held in Bombay. But these things happen. And so then I went for a second BSc, which is called a BA in Oxford. So I went to Oxford for a BA, which you could at that point do in 2 years. The first year was exempted because I already had a BSc. And as you know, there is no concept of a master's, to do a PhD in outside India. I mean, a master's is not compulsory to do a PhD. And so that meant that I could go straight to a PhD. So at the end of these 2 years in Oxford, which I would have, if I stayed back in India, I would have done an MSc for 2 years anyway. I applied to do a PhD everywhere in the US as well as in the UK. And I got a choice of 7, 8 places, the top places in the US, including places like Harvard, MIT, Caltech, etc. And then I had a choice of doing a PhD in Oxford and Cambridge in England. And then I chose to stay in Cambridge to do a PhD and not to go to the US. And I'll tell you why I made that decision. And some of it is still very relevant. And then after it took me 3 years to do a PhD in Cambridge. And then finishing there, I stayed on in Cambridge for 2 years for a postdoctoral fellowship. And then I moved to the US, to Harvard, to do a postdoc, and then I got a job at Harvard. So I started working at Harvard. And then later on in life, I actually came back to India for 5 years to work in IUCAA, where I am now, in the 90s, 95 to 2000 as faculty. So this was my second faculty job. My first research faculty job was at Harvard. And then I went back to England in 2000. So for 14 years, 13 years, I was at the University of Birmingham in England, where, among other things, I was in charge of the physics graduate student admission. So this is where my experience is quite relevant. But that was till about 2012. When I came back to India again, as you know, to presidency. So as the head of physics and dean. But since then, my role has been to recommend to students like most of you where they will go for their PhD. And I've been doing that and sending people and writing references for them, et cetera, and with quite a lot of success. And in the last few years, I've been here in Pune, where in IUCAA, in this Institute of Astronomy Astrophysics. Now, so this is the overview, and this just tells you the different places that I have been, and where you know, and systems that I have seen. Now, one of the questions that I saw a lot of people ask in the various things that people submitted is, you know, why should I want to go to Europe or the UK or the US, you know, to at least start my career for my PhD. And I told you that I made the decision of going to England, but that doesn't mean that it applies to you. It's a very personal decision. It's a very it's subject-specific decision, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some practical things associated with it. Also, I went to England at a time where the political situation was very different. Now it is. Now, of course, things are different, right? But keep this in mind. If you compare the two systems, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you attended the other session that was to do with the American missions, but there are the two systems are very, very, very different. In Europe, in general, education is free, right? Not true in England. It was when I went there. In fact, the year I went there, 84, at the height of the Margaret Thatcher regime, the first fees were introduced for foreign students. Home students, it was still free. Now, of course, home students pay a lot of money and foreign students pay 3 times that much. So the fees in the UK are comparable to many American universities. But my fees in the UK in the mid 80s was 1,000 rupees, 1,000 pounds a year. So it was not much, but still, and for the home students was free. If you look at the continent, most universities do not have academic fees, right? So that is a big consideration if you compare it with the US, where universities have substantial fees, scaled up to the best places have over $50,000 to $60,000 a year, and even more in fees. Now, and of course, on top of it would be living expenses. Now, the difference between the European system and the American system is for graduate students, PhD students, the US universities make a big effort in paying all this through studentships, right? So actually a PhD student does not have to pay these fees because they are paid for as part of a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship or things like that. In Europe, that's not true. Of course, it's not relevant in Germany or in Holland or something where there are no fees. But in England, for example, where there are fees, getting a studentship does not mean often that your fees are completely paid off. Many places, you might have to earn your own fees or partially pay your fees. In fact, when in my time at the University of Birmingham, where I was trying to make scholarships up from different grants in order to bring students to England from India and China and everywhere else, I had to make considerable effort in getting funds from different sources to make these things up to pay the fees as well as the living expenses. And that has gotten more and more difficult now. So there are some scholarships which pay everything, like the American system, but the number of those is small compared to the US, where it's a default. By default, if you get a research studentship or a teaching assistantship, more or less they pay for the fees as well as they pay for some reasonable living expenses. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. The second thing is that the difference between, and this we're talking of sciences because everybody here is a student of science and engineering, so sciences. So at least one of the biggest difference is the time scale, right? So the thing that I thought, I mean, I chose Cambridge over Caltech or Princeton because I knew at that point I could do my PhD in 3 years in England. And even now, 3.5 to 4 years is as much as they will give you. And this is because in the US, you have to go through a very rigorous academic program in which you have to pass exams and you have to do graduate coursework. In most of Europe, the graduate coursework is non-existent, even now. In my time, it wasn't there. Now, people are bringing in a little bit, but it's not rigorous at all in terms like in the US. In the US, you can get thrown out of at the end of graduate school if you don't pass all those tests before you start your proper thesis. You can start your research while you're doing your graduate coursework. In many universities, graduate coursework can be 3 semesters, 4 semesters, even longer. Whereas in England, I finished my PhD in 3 years straight, because even though I had to do, I mean, I did fantastic graduate coursework. I mean, but it was all in parallel. I took the black holes course from Stephen Hawking, for example, in my first semester. Or in things like that, that was part of my graduate coursework. But cosmology was taught by Martin Rees. But those things I could do in parallel with my my PhD research. I was given 3 months to choose my PhD advisor. I did a little short project while doing my graduate courses. And then at the end of those 3 months, I chose my PhD advisor and started on my work. And previous to that, in my second undergraduate degree in Oxford, my tutor had told me, you are ready for research. You should not go into coursework at all. And so that is one of the reasons I chose when I got a studentship in a teaching assistantship at Caltech and a studentship in Cambridge. I thought, I'm not going to wait for 2 more years doing my coursework. I'm ready to do research. Here I go. Right. That is very important in this US versus, if you feel that you are now, that's why I said it's a very personal decision. A lot of you might not feel that you're ready. Even at the end of the MSc, you might feel you're not ready to get into the final thing, the research that will give you your PhD thesis. You might, particularly when you're changing subjects, particularly when you want to work in a kind of an interdisciplinary area, where you've come from physics and you want to learn a little biology, learn a little AI, learn a little machine learning, whatever, you want to learn really important new tools in order to get into your chosen subject. Then you need to get into a place where you have to do a master's or equivalently to do coursework. In the UK and in the continent, you have these master's courses, which are similar to the coursework in the US. Actually, the master's courses are a con. In fact, if you ask me in Europe and in the UK, I would totally recommend not to do any master's course ever, because those were created to make money for the universities. Those were created to keep the universities financially viable. Nobody teaches anything in those courses. But it is recognized that in the East, like in China or in India, people require a master's course. And so these courses are made up to do that. And often these are courses that you would do with the undergraduate people together, the same person teaching the same thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those things serve a purpose when you really need to do those courses to learn something. If you're bridging. But for example, if you've done say, a master's degree or a reasonably good undergraduate degree in a subject like physics or chemistry or whatever your subject is, then, and you consider yourself ready to go into research, I was, then the best thing you can do is to go into somewhere in Europe or in the UK and not go to the US, right? And this is, for example, my best students in presidency, the 3 years I was their head of physics, I sent them to Europe, and they're doing very well. Many of them are in the Netherlands, for example, and various places in France and in England, and some of them are, actually just went slotted into their research straight away. So that's I think one of the second thing is, of course, the cultural experience. You have to think about, and I'm going to stop very soon and hand it over to the others for them to talk about this. But I think for me, I mean, it depends on your personality. I think it's very, 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 very important to think about what your life is going to be. A lot of people go up to university not thinking much. They're just pushed by the system. You sit for a lot of entrance tests by default because everybody else is doing that. And then you depending on where do you get, you go. I was forced to sit for the IIT entrance exams. I went to IIT Kanpur and I ran away 3 days later because I couldn't survive there. Then I went to ISI Kolkata for a few months, for a few weeks actually, because presidency hadn't started yet. And then I realized statistics was not for me. And then I joined the presidency physics because, then I realized that that's where I wanted to be. Now, you might not be like me in terms of having strong likes and dislikes, but remember, the PhD is the most difficult part of your life. And you have to be extremely comfortable. You cannot be outside your comfort zone and do a PhD. Impossible. You'll be a wreck. You have to like where you work. You have to like your supervisor. You have to like your group. You have to like your life, right? And that is very, 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 very important. And so the place is very, very important. Now, politically, I could not, for example, be in a place which is in the American Midwest. I wouldn't survive more than a month. Now, it might not be as important to you as it is to me. I remember going to visit my friend in Kentucky during my PhD at some point. And a friend, an older friend, he had a daughter in school, and she showed me her textbook, and her textbook, biology textbook, had the chapter on evolution stapled together. She was not allowed to read about evolution in high school, right? I would not survive in a place like that, right? So, I mean, so it depends on, so you have to think about that. Can you spend 5 years working and living in a city where you would feel racially profiled, you would feel that you are, not really at the top of things? Would you be able to, and is the cold going to be too much for you? Is the hot going to be too much for you? Are you going to eat properly? Things like that. You have to think about this. This is very, very important. I can tell you, 24 hours worth of stories of people of my group, my college, my background, going to places and having a nervous breakdown, coming back after 3 months and never going anywhere near there again. Stuff like that. I mean, there are equal number of stories of utter failure because of the wrong choice that they made. And of course, when they went to these places, they had a choice of 10 places, they made the wrong choice. I don't want to scare you, but I'm asking you to think about these issues when you make a choice. When you're thinking of going to a place, will you be able to live in Oklahoma for 5 years and do a PhD? Many people can, but many people can't, right? In my many years in the US, I lived for the US in all in about 7 years. I'm married to an American, but I spent much of my time in Arizona and in Cambridge, Mass, in the US at Harvard. And but our telescopes were in Arizona. So I spent quite a lot of time at the University of Arizona. And then I had to spend quite a lot of time in California, and because a lot of our facilities were in Caltech. And so these places I liked very much. And I managed to find a niche in which I had bunches of friends, and I could spend time there. But there are certain places that I could think similarly in Europe and in England, it would be exactly the same. I wouldn't be able to, for example, be, just a minute. Sorry, I'm in the middle. So this is the US. I mean, in Europe and in England, you would find the same thing. You would have to think about the political situation and how you would enjoy living in a place. And we can discuss these later. I mean, people can share their experiences. Right now, with the various political movements going on all through Europe and in the US, it's worth thinking about whether you'd feel comfortable living in a place like post-Brexit Britain. It's a very interesting place now. And in south of France, for example, or in Spain, or in Greece, or in Italy, things like that. We can talk about all that. So I mean, this is I think one of the main issues I wanted to bring in. Then comes finally the question of the subject. The subject itself is very, very important. I said I brought out this issue of wanting to live in a city and the milieu and etc. It's very important. You can hear my African gray parrot. She's going to talk very soon. So, but most importantly, the important thing is the group you're working with and the person you're working with. Very, very important. I mean, in my case, the clinching issue came in Cambridge, not just because I could do it in 3 years, but I really wanted to work with a particular person. And I went and talked to him and figured out, because I was in Oxford, I could go to Cambridge and talk to them. I actually talked to my potential supervisors in Princeton and Caltech as well. And then I realized that this is what I wanted to do. I mean, so the subject and the lab and the supervisors are very, 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 very important. And you can probably find the person you want to work with in Poland. And that's not the most glamorous place to go to if you have an offer from the US or from Cambridge or Oxford. But I think the first priority should go to the subject and the group you want to work with. And then you start thinking about whether I'll be able to eat Polish sausages for 5 years or not. That's the next level of thinking. But I mean, you really want to do some research on where you want to work and what kind of, and I think they will do the same thing too. Nowadays, with this kind of communication, you'd find, there will be a lot of conversations, two-way conversations before, a studentship is offered. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'll let Sampurna and Tathagata carry on this conversation. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Talk about your experiences and whether you think anything I said is different from what you thought of,
For me, it's kind of similar to what you said, but well, for me, actually, my master supervisor motivated me a lot to apply for European positions. But unlike you, I didn't really go through the formal university procedures. My supervisor suggested me to look for fellowships. So I actually looked for Marie Curie fellowship. Right now, I'm a Marie Curie fellow in Durham. So for me, the way of doing things was slightly different because I was more looking for research projects and those kind of things within a good group where I can do what I want to do. And of course, I was also considering what could be my future options after being part of the project, because I don't want to do something which won't lead me to anywhere, even though if it's a great group. So I was searching for things in a more research-oriented way. And for instance, right now I'm doing Bayesian statistics, and I'm in this great industrial project with European Commission where they're trying to do things with Airbus, and they're trying to do certain, uncertain quantification things. So in the first place, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that. And then I discussed with my supervisor, well, my current supervisors, when I had the, interview, and before the interview when I was writing my proposal, and I asked him, so how much can I do except for the project? How much can I do on my own, and what are the prospects? So I was mostly looking for this kind of things. And so, yeah, and as you said about the other stuff, for instance, if I can really live in a place where, say, Tories are very prominent and those kind of things. And it certainly does matter, because I know some of my friends are in right now West Germany, and so they have a certain experience, and my friends were in East Germany, they have a completely different experience. And when you're coming out of India and going to a new place, you want to have some security in your life, which is very reasonable. So we have to look for these things as well, like if you're really comfortable with the culture and the people around you, because you have to stay there for 3 or 4 years, especially in Europe. And if you don't like the place itself, no matter how much you are doing in your work or career, but it's hard, because we should not overlook our mental health as well. So that's something I got to learn from my supervisor, who was in Europe while doing his PhD, and he guided me a lot. That certainly helped me a lot. And besides that, what I can say is, like, especially for UK, one thing that really helps is the, your research focus, because there's so many places. And for instance, especially UK and Germany, things are between industry and science sector. So it's not like France or, say, Switzerland, where you can find a lot of great scholarships within the university to apply for. It's mostly with some industrial partner. For instance, if you're going for, say, biochemistry or biostatistics, it's AstraZeneca or those kind of big industry. So you have to consider it as a job and not just a studentship, because they expect certain outcomes for you. And that's some of the, that's a big reason why it becomes very stressful at times. So you have to consider that if you're really willing to put that much of effort, because once it's more like a job, because there is industrial stakeholder as well as your personal research, and you have to kind of balance in between those things. And that's typically what I realized with my project and my personal research. But of course, you can always go for formal university procedures where you can apply for university bursaries or other scholarships, or there is something called communal scholarships, which are essentially for Indian students from MHRD, I guess. And so there are different aspects, but that's it. Like, you have to decide. It's more. So I'm a statistician, so I would say you have to make a trade-off, and you have to optimize it to have the most or best outcome. And it's, for me, it's like a problem where I have to deal with, and I always look for this. But also, like, the other parts, for instance, as Sir said about living. So besides, like, your current, say, master's or PhD, what you want to do after that, that's also very important. And in general, it's easier to find future careers in Europe because they're more interested in, like, collaborative or interdisciplinary projects within industry. I mean, you can always find Mercedes-Benz having a research sector where they're literally hiring statisticians or engineers to work on their project. And that certainly is one aspect why I prefer Europe. And yeah, and also, as Sir said, like there is this Brexit thing happening, and with this turmoil period, it's actually kind of tricky for Indians or overall communal students, because now there is a huge sparsity in UK market for professionals, because now a lot of like Europeans are moving out of UK. And because of this situation, there is a good opportunity that you may actually get some really fascinating positions within UK after your PhD or say masters. And so that's also something to consider about, that, you know, like, of course, your life doesn't end after your master's or PhD. You have to find something. And if you're really willing to gain some experience abroad, then perhaps this is the right time for European universities, I'd say. Yeah, if Sampurna continues.
I have a follow-up question to this. So
Yeah.
did you change your field from your master's to your PhD? Like, it might not be complete field change, but maybe you chose to go on a different subfield?
Not particularly. So, but yes, I'm from maths background, but I did my master's thesis on stochastic analysis of partial differential equations. And so I was equally interested in stochastic analysis or mathematical statistics in general. And so yeah, that's also one thing that I wanted to be coherent with my master's thesis or my research internships, which I did in PIFR. So yeah, I mean, I didn't do a huge field change, but I mean, let's say I studied in a pure maths background and doing my PhD in applied maths. Let's put it that way.
I have a question for you, because you know, I mentioned this issue of changing fields and whether you need bridge courses to do that. Now, if you did this in, for example, in a US university, then it wouldn't have mattered at all which background you came from, because they would have forced you to do 3 semesters worth of statistics, right? And Bayesian theory and stuff like that. But here, did you have a problem in shifting?
Not really, because I studied in Narendrapur, so I had statistics in past, which is a really great opportunity to get there. And so I was having statistics in my undergrad as well. And since I already did my master's thesis on stochastic analysis, so I had to read sufficient amount of literature on, say, stochastic analysis or mathematical statistics in general. So it wasn't a big deal, but yes, I did take some courses to do, you know, like visualization of data and those kind of basic courses, which you need to know and which you don't know if you're from math, because you just understand the formulation and those things, but the interpretation of data to, say, stakeholders or non-peers, that's important as well. So I had to take those courses, but it's not credited. So I just attended some of the lectures. I got the basic idea and I discontinued, as I didn't need to appear for any exam or something like that.
Great.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Now Sampurna may continue with her experience as well. And yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
What was your
So I was one of the first people in the first batch of biological sciences in presidency. And at that time, we had this very unique course where instead of choosing zoology or botany or physiology or any other thing, we could study a bits of everything for 3 semesters, and then we could specialize on what we want. And it's exactly what I wanted for my undergrad. So I started it. I was very interested at that point in being a wildlife biologist. So my specialization was in zoology. I was doing animal dissections, wildlife tours. I liked it. In parallel, I also had opportunity to work with JBNSTS labs. So me and two of my other friends, Harshita and Devoshruti, we were making nanoparticles for ourselves, and that was a very cool project to do. And so I had 2 years of very rigorous wet lab training. And then in the last semester of my education, we had a course on bioinformatics in presidency. And that was it. So it made complete sense. I was teaching all my classmates about bioinformatics. Apparently, many people didn't get it, but I did. And my classmates are very smart people. So I realized that, this is something that I wanted to pursue for my master's. And the general feedback was, you were insane, because to shift from zoology to bioinformatics, which is basically computer science and heavy statistics, was a very big field change. But I was lucky enough to qualify for the Bioinformatics Center in Savitribai Phule Pune University. So I got an opportunity to study there. It was great because it is the first place to study bioinformatics in India, and I was very lucky to go through it all. And in my second semester, I discovered machine learning. So we use machine learning to predict secondary structures for proteins. And then I ended up getting an industrial internship with the TCS Innovation Labs for my IIS fellowships. And then I could explore that interest further. And then for my master's thesis, I was working on immunology. So I was working on protein-protein interactions and using physical chemistry tools like molecular dynamic simulations. So at the end of my master's, I essentially wanted a project where I could be an immunologist and an AI application data scientist, and I could work on protein structures. And there were very few labs that I could do. In India, one place where I always wanted to go was Indian Institute of Science, because the molecular biophysics unit was set up by Dr. G. N. Ramachandran, and essentially the whole structural biology field is resting on his work. So it was a great legacy to be part of. So I interviewed there, I qualified there, I was set to go. And one of my classmates insisted that I had to apply for the European Molecular Biology Laboratory Fellowships. And I did it very casually because at that point in time, it was April 2018, and I hadn't even submitted my master's thesis. So this is a waste of time. I didn't have a publication, blah, blah, blah. And I got up in May and I interviewed for them the date of my thesis submission. So I was very nervous, but then they invited me to Cambridge to have an interview and I got selected. I think it happened because I specifically mentioned that I want to work with either my current supervisor or another PI, and she's now the head of my thesis committee. So they were literally the only two people in the world for whom I was willing to leave IISc, and that was it. So now I got the fellowship for the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, and then they said that we don't want you to miss out on a university experience. And then I applied to University of Cambridge. But as Sir said, it's what our values are that often guides our choices. So I ended up in applying in Lucy Cavendish College. It is an all-female only postgraduate college, and it's a very diverse community. So it was a very good fit for me. So now I'm here. I would also like to add here that, the whole, I don't do animal work anymore. I am a vegan now. And I stayed in Heidelberg doing my coursework for the EMBL. And it was very difficult for me. And it was very sad because Heidelberg is a lovely town and a pretty city, but there was nothing to eat for vegans. And it was because Germans are very into sausages and yeah. So I like staying in Cambridge, not only because, it's a great place to be, there is a lot more freedom to do, but also because it's a very socially conscious city and it makes my life very easy to live in. And I guess that's it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have
how many things are in common, even though you and I are went to the same place 30 years apart or more. But I think it's very, very important that these are, and when people are going somewhere or planning to go somewhere, these are not things that people think about. But very, very important is because you're going to spend 3, 4, 5 years of your life or even longer. I mean, I ended up spending 25 years in England. And so, but you have to worry about, otherwise to work in a place which you don't like, which doesn't quite fit with your expectations from life, is not an easy thing to do. When people, it's okay when you're doing an undergraduate coursework, but for PhD, where you have to be creative, where you have to do interesting things. Sorry, Tathagata,
yeah, that's fine. Fine. Yeah, so I was asking a different question actually, because since I do statistics, I have a bit of knowledge about EMBL, and my question was like, is there any particular reason for choosing Kingston over Heidelberg?
Yeah, so my current supervisor is in the European Bioinformatics Institute, which is an outstation of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And it also means that I can work in the Wellcome Trust Genome campus, and they are a very inclusive, diverse environment, which is what I like. So that's one thing that guided the choice. I would also like to add that currently I work on organ transplants in the Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, and I never thought I would be doing it. I specifically avoided hospitals, and my mom is a doctor, and I have seen enough of hospitals, and I ended up there anyway. So it's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make, but yeah.
So one of the things, I mean, I'd like to focus this discussion on more now, taking it away from our personal experiences, because
sure.
I think it was very important to share personal experiences, because that's all we have. These are, we can say most about ourselves. But from the point of view of people now applying to go to Europe, so we talked about the Europe versus US issue quite a bit.
Yeah.
Let's keep the US aside. We're focusing on Europe.
Yes.
But say 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, when I was in presidency and you were there, Sampurna, when somebody would come to me and ask, where should I go? Where should I apply? And if I want to go to Europe, I would thoroughly recommend applying to places on the continent, not England, but English-speaking universities on the continent, particularly, because the problem is that most places in Europe, there are problems with coursework being in non-English languages. And unless, I mean, you can be very good at it, in other languages, that's fine. While I was at presidency as a student, I learned French and German. So when I came to Europe, I actually could follow quite a lot of German. So I could have probably attended German courses, but many others don't. And then I have friends who went to Russia, and there they actually teach you the Russian language for a year before you actually do coursework. Similarly, if you remember when we were in presidency, we were having admission tests for the École Polytechnique and École Supérieure in India, and you could go to École Polytechnique straight away and get these scholarships to go there. And that's the top place in these two écoles are the top two scientific universities in France. The difference between École Polytechnique and the others is that there the instruction was mostly in English. But if you go to the Sorbonne, for example, or Collège de Paris, you would have lectures, half of them or more would be in French.
Yeah.
Holland did one thing, and they decided that in the top universities, mostly Groningen and Leiden, and this is why I sent much of my physics students from presidency to Groningen, is that they decided to go completely English. And most of Amsterdam is now, all courses are in English. You write your PhD in English, and you have to just provide a summary in Dutch, which can be translated by somebody else. But this is not true of most places in France or in Italy, or even in Germany. Even though Germany, most places now the science places, things like Bonn, Cologne, Munich, Heidelberg, would do their lectures in English. But still you have places where, so that's a problem. So and then in Northern Europe, in places like Sweden and in Denmark particularly, many universities do English courses. Denmark, certainly Copenhagen, does English courses. But you cannot go to, say, the University of Bologna and expect the courses to be in English, right? So that's a problem. And this is why you have to think about these amazing universities. I mean, places like Leiden and Groningen, places like École Polytechnique, places like, say, Heidelberg or Munich or Bonn or Cologne. I mean, I've sent several students here from here to Bonn and Cologne in the last few years because they have scholarships for Indian students and for foreign students. These are top universities of the world, and you can actually go slot into a PhD or an MSc program straight away. So the language is important. But now, the reason I brought this up is that 5 years ago, I was not recommending English universities at that time because the number of scholarships available for Indian students had fallen to almost zero. Because during the time when I was in Birmingham as the graduate students advisor, I saw this change. There used to be something called the Overseas Students Scholarship, the ORS, which was given by the UK government for 500 foreign students. By foreign, they meant outside the European Union, students to come to the UK. And that stopped at about 2006 or so, 2007, I think. And between 2007 till now, and now meaning in the last couple of years, when Brexit started happening, it was very difficult for people from outside the European Union to come and get full scholarships in the UK, unless you are in one of these named scholarships like you have, for example, both of you have. And I got something called the Isaac Newton studentship in Cambridge, which is actually Isaac Newton's own money. He left the money to the University of Cambridge and they give 3 scholarships. Still, you can apply, anybody can apply, but you have to work in an area in which Newton had some interest. So it could be physics, chemistry, mathematics, or astronomy, things like that. But there are these scholarships, and it's a fully paid scholarship. So it covers fees as well as your living expenses. But there are these scholarships now. And those things, other than these named scholarships, the number of scholarships fell to zero. And now, as Tathagata mentioned rightly, what is happening now post-Brexit is that now all these opportunities are opening up to non-Europeans. So between, say, 2006, 2007 till about a couple of years ago, most scholarships were getting restricted to people who are residents of the European Union. So even though I'm completely anti-Brexit myself, this is one aspect of Brexit that actually helps Indians, and in terms of getting scholarships, and certainly not just that, but as Tathagata will tell you, job opportunities also. What happens after you finish your PhD? In the US, for example, there used to be an extension visa program where after finishing your PhD, you were allowed to work for at least 2 years before your visa ran out. That has been restricted in the Trump administration in a huge way. I'm not sure what the current status is. But for example, when I worked in the UK, I also had that. After my PhD ended, I could for 1.5 years work in the UK. Now those things are going to become more easy in the post-Brexit regime, where students from the Commonwealth, particularly in India. The other thing I really cherished in England was that as a Commonwealth citizen, I could vote, right? I'd never voted in the US. In fact, I'd never voted in India because I went to England before my voting age almost. And so till 2 or 3 years ago, I'd only voted in England. So Commonwealth citizens actually have a lot of advantages in England. And I think the scholarship opportunities in England is also now going to be, I mean, I can see many universities now coming up with scholarships aimed at now Commonwealth students and Indian students. And I'm sure Sampurna and Tathagata will have other, know of such opportunities. So I think that is that. I think coming to Europe now, I think England comes into the picture again. But until very recently, I would have said the top places to go to would be the English-speaking or the English-speaking universities, like in Holland or in Germany, mostly. But now I think, I'm not just taking England, of course, I'm talking of the UK in general. So, of course, there are fantastic universities in Scotland and Northern Ireland, it seems like that, yes, and Ireland itself.
We have a question about medicine, because we haven't really touched on medical aspects. From my experience in the hospital, I can say that there's suddenly a lot of interest in biomedical applications for specifically, but that might not be the core medicine curriculum that people could be looking for. So do you have any experience or from when you were at the graduate admissions, or do you know about friends who might have been there?
So I can, I can say that for both normal medicine and veterinary medicine, there are a lot of Indian students doing this kind of thing all over.
Yeah.
It's different from getting a professional accreditation. For example, there are many doctors from India who go to do their MRCPs and FRCSs and things like that. That's different. That's completely different. That's like lawyers also going to go to the bar. But studying medicine, there are scholarships that actually are focused on medicine alone. And the medical schools in places like Cambridge, for example, which has one of the top vet schools in the country, as well as the top normal medical schools, both Oxford and Cambridge. So they have quotas for foreign students. And there, I mean, we should talk about this now. Getting into medical school in the UK, the SOPs are very, very important, because they actually make you write a lot of stuff as part of your application. But actually going for either a medical degree or a PhD in medicine, both at undergraduate level as well as a PhD level, is very, very. I mean, just think of what happens in some of these MRC labs in the UK. I mean, in the COVID crisis, you can see some of the top research is happening in the Addenbrooks and in Oxford for the vaccine and stuff like that. And a lot of the Indian PhD students are involved in all this. So Sampurna's experience is also, I mean, coming from a biology background, you are working in a hospital there as part of a medical team. You can easily be working with somebody who's a qualified doctor who's working in the same lab with you, right?
Yeah, my supervisor is a surgeon, so.
There you are. So, but the scholarships in general don't discriminate between that. For example, I was talking about the INLAC scholarship. That's one of the oldest scholarships that there is to go to England. And now it is generalized. You can go to anywhere in the world with an INLAC scholarship. And in our time, it was only England. But, and I sit on the interviews every year. Right now, you can apply for an INLAC scholarship. So you have to get admission first. And now the way it works is that you apply for the scholarship after you get admission. And nobody discriminates between anybody who has an engineering degree or a medical degree or a physics degree or a biology degree there. You can have a professional degree as long as you know which course you want to do. I mean, what subject you want to do a PhD in and what lab you want to work in. Having a medical background actually it helps a lot.
I have a question for Professor Raychaudhury.
Yes.
I'm Rajarshi Roy.
Okay.
My question is that...
are we doing questions now, or are we? Did you have anything else? I mean,
I want you to describe something as a part of whatever you have already said. Actually, once in 2004, in the autumn, I went to Helsinki University of Technology as a visiting scientist. And I really had a very good time over there. What I enjoyed there is that the specific type of laboratory culture they have. That is the entire day you essentially spend in the lab. Your workplace is basically your home also in some sense. So if a professor could tell something more on that, like that is not what we typically do here where I work here now, or that I again didn't do to that extent when I did my master's in IISc Bangalore. It's like the department was department, hostel was hostel. Okay.
No, okay.
So,
I think it's a very
over
interesting
there,
question. But
it is like you take your lunch with your professor. Okay, with the entire lab takes
okay.
together.
Let me because you've asked this question, but I think we should finish the panel discussion and come to the question. Since you raised this, let me answer this. I used to have a bed in my office. So I used to have a bed in my office, and often I spend 24 hours in my office. In fact, in most labs, and in fact, frankly speaking, in my institute here in Pune, most students do the same. So I think in many cases, the lab and the residence merges after a certain point. It depends on your subject. Of course, if you work in a biology lab where mice are running around, health and safety won't allow you to live in the lab for 24 hours. But if you're doing computational work like I was doing, I often would go to sleep and wake up in the middle of the night and do the rest of my work. So you're right, the work culture is very different in Europe. But
Another
I think
issue, sir, as you have said about
yeah,
Rajashida, could we
have said
take your
about
questions in a
Can we
QA
come back-
session?
Can we come back at the end? Yes.
Yeah.
Let's complete this discussion. Otherwise, we will.
We'll do a QA.
Yeah, okay.
So if
very
you have
good.
any questions, Rajashida, please type to me and then we can have a QA. And this is a request to everybody else. If you have any other questions, we will do half an hour QA.
Sampurna, so let's finish what we were talking about.
Yeah.
I think you had, based on the questions, you had some other issues that we wanted to discuss.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tathagata, if you had anything else to say. Let's do that.
No, I think I pretty much said everything, but as Rajashida asked that question, so something came up my mind. So essentially, my supervisors, one of them is German and one of them is Belgian, and always suggested me not to work after 5.
This is the European Union, thing now.
So it's not like that we're always working. That's kind of me. I mean, it may happen for experimental subjects, but in general, my supervisors, or I've seen many supervisors saying that to their students, that don't overwork because then you are burnt out and you cannot really work in a more productive manner. So if you're just happy working for 8 hours and doing productive work, that's fine.
Yeah, I would echo the same, especially because I work in the Wellcome Campus campus, and they are very into, having a positive work culture and having a life-work balance. So they would recommend you to, work for certain hours and then have a life and then attend other things. But this, again, of course, if I was working with mice, there are some experiments that take 24 hours to run, so I would have to come back and take data. And of course, it matters from person to person, but it is not a prerequisite to apply into a PhD program.
I have to say that one of the I told you that I'm completely anti-Brexit. And one of the reasons is that inclusion in Europe helped the British understand certain things. Of course, it stopped, war in Europe for many decades. But the other thing was that the European laws actually placed a lot of emphasis on the work-life balance. As you know, in Europe, you're not allowed to work more than 37.5 hours a week and things like that. And you would often get emails from Germans who would actually say, if this email comes to you at a time outside your working hours, please excuse me from bothering you, stuff like that. And that is a very, very interesting aspect of this approach. This actually translates not into the work-life balance, but also a balance in terms of gender opportunities, in terms of harassment of supervisors, forcing students to work more than they should. You know, there have been very high-profile cases all across Europe in the last couple of years, where people have lost their jobs not because of sexual harassment, but harassment in the workplace by forcing people to work more than they should, and things like that. And so this is a very interesting aspect of, and I think it is far more advanced in Europe than in the US right now. Certainly far more advanced than in India. And this is a very, very important issue, I think. And both Tathagata and Sampurna would have been in a lab where they were very aware of such things. Now, there are aspects, I mean, I talked about how I could work 24 hours, I was given the opportunity to, but you are also given the opportunity to do it. If for example, you have to do this, right?
Yeah, it's different for deadlines, say. When I have deadlines, I have to work. That's a different thing.
Anyway, so I think what we're going to talk about before we open up for questions, what we're going to talk about the application process and opportunities.
Yes.
And things.
I think we should also touch on whether about opportunities of foreign internships. There was a question about that. One thing was the foreign One thing was the foreign internship, and then the other question would be, you know, what timelines to look out for while applying. Those are the two things we need to discuss before we open up for and the application. Yeah.
So do you want me to address these things, or would you like to talk about it?
Sure.
Okay. So I think for the American applications, the timeline is extremely fixed because American universities have very, very definite rules about, as you know, you have to apply, appear for the GREs, or in many cases, or TOEFLs, or any of these other other exams, standardized exams that you have to take before you apply to a particular university. And for American universities, the deadlines are often at the end of December or at the end of January, between December and January. Some are very early, like 15th of December, some are as late as the 31st of January. But before that, everything has to be complete. All your standardized tests, as well as writing these long applications full of SOPs and stuff like that, as well as reference letters, etc., etc., etc. So that sets a kind of time scale where people start preparing for these things at least 6 months before December. So from June, July, where you start, doing research on the departments, getting forms, etc., and filling up, etc. But actually, you start a year before that if you have to time your various exams that you have to sit for, the GREs and TOEFLs and things like that. So for example, if you're applying for 2021, August, September, you have already scheduled your standardized tests and you've started doing your research for which universities to apply at the end of December. This is for Americans. Now for the European system, there's a huge flexibility depending on what country you're applying to, right? For example, if you're applying to these general scholarships, right? I don't know about the scholarship Sampurna got, the medical and the biological scholarships. When is the deadline for those things for the following year?
So for mine, the application would close in October.
October this year, for next year, right?
Yes.
And for example, this year, I'm talking of the INLACs and the Rhodes scholarships and the INLAC scholarships, general European scholarships, they close in June, normally. June, July, right now. And this year, of course, they were all canceled. So this year, they haven't, but June, July would have been. And so what you're saying is you have to apply more than a year In many cases, it's September, October. So it depends on the scholarships. So this is the time. So you applied in October, right?
No. So when I was applying, so my particular fellowship happens twice a year. So I applied in April for October, and then for the next year, April, it's again October. So it happens like that. But in general, for other Cambridge fellowships, I was also applying for the Rhodes Scholarship interviews. So it was, as you said, June, July, September. I think June to September is the cutoff, especially for UK. For, I think, the DAAD fellowships for Germany, it's January, if I'm not wrong. So it's at least, as Sir said, at least 12 months or 10 months before the application. I don't know the timeline for Marie Curie.
For Marie Curie, it's mostly once the projects are sanctioned by European Commission, they advertise it in their website. And so there are several websites like Iisc, which is very nice to learn about these kind of opportunities. So usually it starts from, say, March to May. Like within these 3 months, there are several Marie Curie projects that are coming up. And so for me, it was like end of May, but there are several other Marie Curie projects.
But
which
you're saying end of May to start in September, October, right? So
yes,
just 3 months. So yeah, so
like
people need to understand how this works. People to understand how this works. So it's very, very interesting, Tathagata. The thing is, there are two kinds of scholarships. One is scholarships that are given directly to students. Okay, so for these are very important for people to understand this. Now, some of these are general. It is open to any subject. And some of these are subject specific. Now, the more general it is, the more lead time you require. Right? So Rhodes Scholarship, for example, I was talking about, it's open for everything to go to Oxford. But it closed in June because there are so many things that happen after it. The interviews and various other levels of admission that is happening in the host university, etc. And there's a huge screening process. There are thousands of applications people have to go through, and I go through that every year. So there's a huge lead time. Whereas, and I'll come back to these in a minute, whereas there are subject-specific ones in which the grant is given to a supervisor. The supervisor gets the grant, and then they advertise for a position for the studentship, like a job. So this is all the European Union grants are like this. And Marie Curie is one of them. I had at least 3 Marie Curie grants when I worked at the University of Birmingham. They all come, you apply in August. They give you the grant in January, and then or February, and then you have to apply, advertise, and by March, April, you really want to recruit somebody because you want them to start in August or September. You see what I mean? So this is exactly what Tathagata got. His supervisor would have got the grant in January or February, and then they would have advertised, and then they would have. So this is the kind of time scale of the European Union ones, and the European Union scholarships can go to any European country. Now, in the post-Brexit arrangement, they have assured that England can still, or the UK can still get European Union grants, at least for the time being. That's going to go. That's going to go. In fact, that's one of the problems, because while I worked in Birmingham, almost maybe 80 to 90% of my entire funding came from the European Union. And the British universities are going to feel the pinch. But right now what they have done, just because politically it is very important for the government to show that Brexit is a good thing, they're trying to put in a lot of money for scholarships and academic research from the British government. And these are called Ecrf funds. So for example, you'll hear things like the Isaac Newton Scholarship or the Stephen Hawking Fellowship or things like that. There are lots and lots of them. In fact, I've just got a grant together with the University of Glasgow and the University of Birmingham and ourselves, a Newton Bhabha Fund. And the Newton Bhabha Fund is Homi Bhabha and Newton together. And we just got £250,000. And we're advertising people, studentships for it, things like that. So these are things that the academics get, and then you advertise. So for those specific ones, and those are specific for projects, right? Because the person has written this grant, in order to recruit somebody to do a particular project. So there you won't have this flexibility that you can do whatever you like. You will know, and often these grants are industry connected to it, because you have to have industry as a partner in order to get these grants. Most European grants are like that, and which is great for job prospects of the person recruited. So you should look for these scholarships, as Tathagata said, in February, March, when most of these come up. So this is very short lead time, because as soon as you get the scholarship, you have to go. But if you want these generic scholarships, which are like, as I said, used to be Nehru scholarships in my time, now they're called something else. But the general scholarships, which are Cambridge scholarships for Indians, Oxford scholarships for Indians like Rhodes or ILACs and things like that, you have to start 18 months before your start, right? 18 months, which is you're starting in March, April of the previous year, in order to prepare and find when the ads come out and whatever you need. The thing there is that you don't need to sit for these standardized exams like GREs and TOEFLs, but you have to submit, each university is a different thing. You have to submit some things that you have to do. Now, here is another very interesting thing. Just to compensate for the fact that you don't need GREs and stuff like that the American universities need, the European universities, including the UK universities, really put a lot of emphasis on two things, actually three things. Number one, your own statement of purpose in terms of what you want to do and what your background is. Two, the letters of reference. And three, whether you have any published work or not, right? In many cases, actually, published work is absolutely compulsory. Now, this poses a problem for Indian students. And this is why when I reached presidency and I became Dean of Science, Sampurna would know, one of the first things I did was set up this whole system. Her Department of Biological Sciences was one of the things that we set up. And we said, our final year students, our MSc students are going to do a thesis. Now, I left presidency several years ago and now they've destroyed that system. But even now I have several students each year who actually write published papers, starting from their BSc straight on. And that has paid off because they get a chance to go into these things. Now, the reason is because I saw this from my position as a tutor, admissions tutor in Birmingham. When I was getting these applications from abroad, so for my physics department, I would get, I don't know, 300 applications every year to do PhD, and I had maybe 25 places. The Chinese students had 3 or 4 publications each, right? And that is because in the Chinese top universities, they actually do research from day one. This is like the system in the ICERs and the Iisc here now. We are waking up to this now, but China started this 10, 15 years ago. And they are far ahead. They actually have, top journals they publish and, things like that. And so you're competing with them. So you need at least one publication. And this is why I think a lot of people have woken up to the fact that as soon as they start their undergraduate degree, they try and see whether they can get somebody with whom they can work and get some kind of a publication when they're applying. Now, if you are applying now and you start doing some research to do, you won't get it. Publication takes 2 or 3 years, right? Now, what is the alternative if you can't do a publication? Then, you have experience in working in a lab that produces such publications, etc. That translates into the second thing I said, which is the reference letter. Now, let me tell you another thing. Indians cannot write reference letters. I can say this from my role as an admissions tutor, looking at reference letters that come from academics from all over the world. Most Indians would write a reference letter for you and you think, oh my God, they've written a wonderful letter for me. But the letter that the university gets says things like, he's a very, or she's a very good student, was very obedient to me and very obedient to the parents, and is very regular, came to class every day, things like that. This is not anybody who, ambitious tutor doesn't want to hear this. Obedience is not a virtue. They want to hear what is your thinking capacity. They want to hear what performance you had, not in exams, but outside exams. How can you think out of the box? What kind of questions you asked in class, and stuff like that. And when I see a reference letter written by a German or an American, I see these things mentioned, right? So one of the most important things that I would say today is that you have to choose your referees very, very carefully. Your referees have to be people, generally younger people, who know how to write references, who can talk about how you were in a lab or how you were in class, and they can write at length. The reason my students in presidency have been very successful in getting, PhD positions everywhere is that we have a bunch of people who we trained how to write reference letters, right? And so you have to choose your referees, very, very important. And the other thing is they often require 2 or 3 references. Often, as a student, you don't interact with that many academics well enough for them to write references for you. So it is important for you to actually make contact with people who can write such things about you. They know enough about you, for example. And so when somebody's reading a reference letter, in absence of GRE scores or exam scores, actually, how do you, they don't know how to give weight to your exam marks, your BSc or MSc marks, pass, honors, whatever. Academics outside don't know how to calibrate them. Somebody gets 75% in their honors, which is fantastic in Kolkata University, but is nothing compared to what people get anywhere else, things like that. So the reference letters become very, very important. And so you have to have people who write the reference letters, who talk about, and this is why you need to be engaged in things they can write about. You can be the topper in your class. It means nothing to somebody who's selecting you for a PhD. They are looking for people to mention how you can think, how good you're in a lab, or how good you are at computing something, or what is the smartest question you asked in class, things like that, right? I don't know whether I made sense, but this is the kind of thing you need to prepare in the long term if you are looking for your application to stand out from a bunch of, say, 200 applicants, which are coming from anonymous universities with people with strange names and strange backgrounds and stuff like that. And these are not, our universities are not standardized, right? So this is a problem, an European faculty member trying to choose faces. So for example, when I worked in a department in England, every single other colleague of mine would come to me saying, oh, I got this application from India. Can you tell me what this means? How good is 84% from Jamshedpur or whatever? Or how good is 79% from Bhagalpur University? And what does this mean? This guy got, so much in statistics pass, things like that. So this doesn't mean anything. What means is, what you write about yourself, why you want to do what you want to do, and what other people write about you, people who have known you well. The other mistake people make is that they give reference letters from people who cannot assess them academically. For example, if you're my nephew, I'm not qualified to write for you, right? I have family members who come to me saying, can you give me a reference letter for a university? No. Similarly, if, for example, I've taught you in school, I'm not qualified to write for you. So people pay very important, and of course, if you are, for example, the most famous person in the department, but you've never taught me, then your reference is not going to count. I had a reference letter from Somak Raychaudhury in presidency, who actually taught me 3 courses. And that reference letter wrote, and later on, Roger Penrose in Oxford told me, I saw your reference letter. It was from Somak Raychaudhury. right? So they knew this person and saw that this person had taught me and had written a letter saying that I had taught this person, right? Now, if he'd just been my head of department and he had never taught me, then his letter would have meant nothing. Okay, please remember this. So these are the main tricks are, and in particular, if you want to get financial aid, where the thing is very competitive, to make sure you get reference letter writers who know about you and can write things that will stand out. And secondly, you have evidence of doing some research, either a published paper or actually, as Sampurna said, or Tathagata said, they actually do some work with somebody so that there is some work there, even if there's no published work, there is some evidence of some work. Sorry, it took a lot of time, but I think that this is a very important part. I don't know whether Sampurna or Tathagata has anything to add to this.
We agree. I think we agree completely. But
Yeah.
I would like to add one point, especially for biologists, because biology publications take a lot of time for complete, because that's how the process is, and the review takes forever. So it's not like places you're applying to would understand. It's also a good idea, because we don't talk about it often, to put preprints in bioarchive. Even if the paper isn't published, you could give a DOI ID saying, this is in review. Also, and it's a negative thing, but I think I need to mention it, I have heard several friends of mine who, had to do a lot of very weird things just to get a good reference, and you need to watch out for that.
In addition to that, I usually use ResearchGate because you can then also get some feedbacks from peers. So that's another option as well, apart from archive. But yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think the last topic we will address before opening for QA is foreign internships. What is your view on internships, or how to get one, or what would you consider, like how, if you wanted an intern in your lab, what would you look for?
Okay, I can address that. That's a very interesting aspect of this. And it's related, very related to what I just said. One of the good ways of showing that you have a research experience is to have an internship, because then not only does the person with whom you've interned can write about you as a letter of reference, you also can show that you've done this tangible piece of work. And this internship could be theoretical, it could be computational, or it could be a lab piece of work. It could also be in industry. Okay, so now the problem is to get one of these. Now, if you are in an IIT, for example, they give you training to do this. In many institutions, but because you can see this, because what happens is that when you're an admissions tutor like I was, every year I would get about 100 identical letters from IITs. 100 identical. Identical meaning it has a structure which is the same, except that certain names have been changed and certain things have been changed, and they're taught to do this. So what you do, what they teach you is to go to the website of a particular university and pick out certain names and subjects from their web pages. And then you get this letter saying, hello, professor, sometimes not even my name there. Hello, professor. I am very interested in, galaxy evolution on the cosmic web or whatever, which they cannot be interested in because they wouldn't know anything about it. But that's a buzzword that's being picked from my Wikipedia page or my web page. And thus I have read your paper, so and so and so and so and so and so, and I get 5 papers that I have written. They're listed there, that they've lifted from the archives. And then they have said, I have read all these papers and I'm very, very interested in working with you for an internship. And here am I am I'm a sophomore in so-and-so IIT. IITs don't have sophomores, American universities do. And things like that. So they're taught to write this. And as soon as I get a letter like this, I would throw it in the bin. And that's because it's a form letter. And I knew exactly that this is a person who's not a sincere person. He's essentially sending the same letter to 10,000 people, and they've written a script in which they've written this letter, and it's just picking up things from an Excel file, right? So what are internships? Academic internships like this exist. Typically, most people who have grants, even in India, and certainly in European labs and in European departments, get grants, and they can break up their grants into studentships, like the one Tathagata is getting, for example, which is a full studentship, which pays the fees, etc., etc., etc. But I can also hire people for 3 months for a summer vacation job, in which I pay somebody to come from their home country and come to my lab and work for 3 months and pay 3 months worth of accommodation, food, etc., some scholarship, and things like that. So this is a quantum of money that I apply for in my grant, and they give me, say, 1 intern or 2 interns every year. But there are other grants also that give grants to scientists to hire interns, either from within the country or from abroad. So typically, each faculty member in a university would have grants for at least 1 intern every summer. And some people have 5, some people have 10. If they're a big lab in which they have bunches of students and postdocs, they might have quite a few. Some people even take a studentship and money and break it up into a lot of internships. So money is there. Question is, how do you then get them? Again, it's a smaller version of a PhD student application. You have to show that you have a certain interest in doing a certain kind of thing, and also have at least 1 letter from from one of your professors which says that you are very well suited to this kind of job. But to get that, what you have to do is not to send out 1,000 letters to 1,000 places, but to actually find out where you want to go, what you want to do. So you have to have some idea of what you want to do. So you have to do a lot of research to find out who are the people. And then what you can do is just send a little email to saying that, I'm interested in this general area. I'm in the 2nd year, and you should do this in the 2nd year, for example, of your BSc or BTech or similar level. Because, when you are actually very near the exams, it's very difficult. And then I would like to spend the summer working in your lab or working on this with you. And in the current situation, I'm getting letters by people saying, I want to work on Zoom with you, right? Same thing, which involves no money at all. But this kind of stuff can happen. And in fact, I have 3 Zoom students right now who are writing papers with me. They're all undergraduates. So, so this can happen. And actually, now that people have learned how to use Zoom, you would find the nature of internships is also going to change. There's no money involved. If I have time, I can supervise students and they can write papers with me. And unless you need to work in a particular lab, if it's a mathematical project or a theoretical project or a computational project, Zoom is as good as anything, right? So now the question is, you have to also understand that you're demanding time from a certain person who's very busy. So you have to stand out from the crowd. So what you do is you identify 5 to 10 people all over the world. And in the Western world, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in South Africa, in Europe, where people have this structure of grants, there are always people who have money to hire people for the summer for internships. And you have to find the right person, write an exploratory email to begin with, maybe right at the end of your 1st year or something like that, or beginning of your 2nd year, saying, look, I'd like to do this. And they will write back either saying, no, can't do this, or ignore you completely. Or they can write back saying, okay, talk to me, say more. And then you go a little beyond and say, look, this is what I want to do, etc. And so this can be a conversation with somebody rather than a blanket email that's sprayed around. You would find that in many universities, they're far more organized than what I just said. And they actually have a scheme in which they say, we have internships, apply. In fact, for the DST, we have the, are they called the Schottenbusch fellowships, which are essentially SN Bose fellowships to go to the US for internships. SN Bose fellowships. And in biology, it's the Kurana fellowships. So, which are 3-month internships, essentially, just this kind, where the selection happens in India and you can go. But, you know, that's one of the more organized kinds of internships. But the scientists themselves would have the money. I think, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to this.
I want to add one point. So as you said, like it's very nice to have an internship in, say, undergrad, second year as well. And I want to point out that now we have that opportunity within JBNSTS to do research for a year, especially in our second year. And I think it's a really good approach to document them accordingly so that you can also show to others that, okay, you have done this thing throughout this period. And maybe just with your university teacher, doesn't matter, but you have done something as a research for a year is fine. And we should also focus on that, because when I was doing that, I just saw it as a task. And we had to like present, we did accordingly. But now when I look back, I think it would have been much better if we had just like document those things accordingly and store it somewhere and maybe like publish an undergrad student paper or something like that. And this is also something we can like think about while having this amazing opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I had the opportunity to develop my JB project to almost the end, and I attended 4 conferences in my undergrad out of it. So that was a good experience. And if you are a JB scholar, you also have the Inspire Fellowship, and that enables you to apply to, you know, even if somebody doesn't have per se the funding, you can say, I have my own funding.
Yeah.
Can I work for you? Which is great.
That really, really helps. No, I mean, it's not a given that anybody can, because you have the money. I mean, I've had several such offers,
Yeah, of course.
but my time is limited, right? So if I'm actually offering an internship, I would not want more than 1 or 2 interns in the summer. So you have to find the person who's willing to guide you.
Exactly.
But having, for example, part of the money, and Inspire, for example, gives you travel money. So you can actually pay the plane fare or something like that. That really, really helps. And nowadays, since people have learned how to interact with Zoom, this pandemic has been really good for us in that way. Then you can stretch that internship to maybe interact with the person or the lab for a couple of months or before you actually go. And in some cases, you don't even have to go. So such things can happen. I think the nature of internships is going to become very different, I think.
Okay,
let's see.
Yeah. So please go ahead. I think we should open the session for live Q&A because we have about less than half an hour left. If you have a question, we would like you to use the reaction and use the raise hand option so you can unmute yourself and talk. Or if you prefer, you can type it.
The best way to do this is, what you do is if you have Zoom on your either laptop or phone, go into participants, click the participants button, the participants window will open. And the bottom of the participants window, there is something called raise hand, the blue thing, right? If you click on that, that will allow us to see who is raising their hands. Okay, you can also get it as part of reactions, I think. Yeah, there you are.
So Raju Shida has raised his hand.
Okay. So go ahead. And then the host can unmute or mute. Yes.
Sir, actually, you were telling that the place where you will be working, the particular city or area or the particular country, and there what kind of social environment is there that can affect a PhD student. Yes, I agree with that, but and that way you are also saying that like the Midwest, there can be certain kind of things out there. But in general, my experience is like I did my PhD in New York City. So New York City is very good. And also Boston, because I worked in Boston. Boston is also very good. I mean, I never felt that anything. It is like living in Calcutta. It's very good. I mean, and New York City, the advantage is that you can always, get into various cultural activities and you can enjoy your life. Another thing is that is one way it's a problem also, because the PhD student may start liking that so much that he might put his studies aside and always enjoying his life. That's again not good, but that way you have it's a very great place to, like,
I think
places
this
like
is one of the
NYU or
reasons I mentioned this. I think I mentioned this because certainly somebody who grew up in Kolkata would love a place like London or New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or stuff like that. But more than that, there are other elements now that one has to think about. In Trump's America, in Boris Johnson's UK, in various places in Europe where the far right is coming up, the amount of racism, even in big cities, is increasing. And the more you go away from big cities, and in the US, it's the Bible Belt. For example, France, it is the South, and things like that. You can end up in a situation where it can be, rather insecure for somebody of my skin color to be there. And so, and then this is not just the issue of color. In certain cases, there are gender issues. There are various other issues. And so I don't think this should be the topmost criterion in choosing a place to apply to, but this should be pretty much one of the things that people should think about. I think it should be part of the decision process in terms of where, I completely agree with you. You're not going somewhere just because the symphony orchestra there is fantastic, or they have the best, theater group or whatever. That is should not be the base consideration. The consideration is whether you'll be discriminated against, or whether you'll have a life that you'd like for 5 years. Sorry, can we go ahead to the other questions? Yes. Sampurna, are you organizing this, or who will take these questions? Because one of the co-hosts.
The next one is from Somak Raychaudhury. Please unmute yourself.
You are the host. Are you the co-host? You
yes,
can
I'm the co-host. I am unmuting you. Yeah.
You can unmute.
Please. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. I'm actually an engineering student. What prospects does Europe hold for engineering students? I'm from the mechanical field, actually.
Right. So let me get this straight. You're a mechanical engineer you want to do research in mechanical engineering, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, of course, you don't have to do research only in mechanical engineering, because there are many fields in which mechanical engineers can do research.
I'm actually interested in the computational domain, with emphasis on fluid mechanics, heat transfer, combustion, those areas.
Yeah. So you can actually work in a place which could be a completely fluid mechanics place as well. You can easily work in an applied maths department as well, right?
Yes.
In fact, in my department here in astronomy and astrophysics, out of my 55 students, I have about 20 engineers. At least 5 of them are mechanical engineers, and many of them are not even working in mechanical engineering. They're working on cosmology or whatever. But the thing is, if you're interested in the Navier-Stokes equation, you can use it anywhere you want. So you have to first decide whether you want to do a PhD in mechanical engineering, or you want to do a PhD in an allied subject where you use your skills, and you have to choose your place accordingly. Now, there are some scholarships that are geared completely for engineering students. For example, I mentioned the INLAC scholarship. The INLAC scholarship has 5 or 6 scholarships every year for Imperial College London, only for engineering students. right? And these are full PhD scholarships for Imperial London. And there it's for the engineering departments and the science departments, but for people with the BTech background from India. Similarly, there are opportunities like this everywhere else. Now, so two things you have to consider. One is whether you want to stay within mechanical engineering. Now, you can do mechanical engineering and you can do automation, you can do robotics, which will have a lot of computation. You can do artificial intelligence with a mechanical engineering background, which would be AI robotics, which would be a huge amount of computation involved, right? And so, for example, people who work in the media lab in MIT have backgrounds in computation and mechanical engineering quite a bit. So you have to find places like that. And in Europe, there are fantastic places. Switzerland is a wonderful place to look for such things. Germany is a fantastic place to look for. And in the UK, some of the best departments are, as I said, in Imperial, in Cambridge, in Edinburgh, and places like that. You should look at the engineering departments and also associated science departments, which might be called departments of robotics or control systems and stuff like that, which require mechanical background.
Okay, we will move over to Anisha.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Sir, actually, I'm a final year student in BTech, and my domain is electronics and telecommunication engineering. Now, I want to start my PhD in probably next year, like August or September. So, what should be the right time to approach a supervisor or a prospective supervisor, preferably in UK? And also, how should I approach that person? Like you said about internships, so how should that be for a PhD applicant?
Well, I think the time is now. I think you could have started it a little earlier, but this is okay. The time is right now, and you're not applying for an internship now. You're ending. You're finishing in summer next year.
Yes.
You're applying for a PhD. So your time for internship is gone. What you want to do is you look for a group to work in right now, and look through the top universities to see what kind of, and not just looking through. I mean, going through university websites is probably not the best thing to do. It's probably the best thing to do is to talk to people in your department or the people you've done research with, and ask who which labs are relevant in the kind of interest that you have. And that's the better way of finding an appropriate lab than just randomly going through people's websites. But both are all right. Find some places and then start writing to them saying, look, I'm now, do you know? So you can ask them, they would know what the financial resources are of hiring you as a PhD student. I mean, if I am running a lab sitting in the UK, I will try my best to get as many students as I can from outside the system. So I would know. Nobody's going to come and say, look, I don't know anything. You go and find your own scholarship. They will help you. They'll have to help you to some extent, right? In addition, you look for your own scholarships, which they might not know about. But I think it's important to find the right person, and it's important to do it now.
So actually, I have selected some labs and some professors whose work is actually of my interest, but I was thinking like, how should I start approaching? Like, what should be the content of the first email that I will write to that person? So that was the question. Like, what things should I first put in that first email so that that person actually gets interested in asking me further questions?
So what I would ask you to do, and this I would say to everybody here, what I would ask you to do is to try and, I know it is difficult, but try to put yourself in the place of the person you're writing to, right? And think of now yourself 20 years from now running a lab, and you have somebody who's writing an email to you from a place who you've never heard of or you have no idea about, right? And they're writing this email to you. What would draw your attention to that email? if somebody's writing to you from, very well-known lab in Harvard University, then that's different. But in particular, they might not know your institution. They might know something about your institution, but have never been there. In many cases, you'll find they've actually visited your institution. That's different. But in general, imagine somebody who doesn't know much about your educational background, what kind of education you have had, and then think about what would draw their attention. Because what you're doing is you're trying to draw their attention among maybe 50 applications that they've had to work with them, or 100 applications they've had. So what you have to do is to talk about your interests, the fact that you're passionate about working in a particular field. It doesn't have to be one single field. It doesn't have to be extremely narrow. But it should express an interest in doing a particular work. You don't have to talk about your philosophy in life, which a lot of people do, and you don't have to talk about feeding the world's poor or whatever. You don't have to do that. You want to talk about your interest in the science and in general. And then you can say that, it looks like in your lab or in your group, such and such work is being done. And then most importantly, you have to talk about skills. The most important buzzword in this is the word skill. Because when one is looking at somebody to hire for their lab or for a studentship or even for a professorship, the main things that somebody looks for is what skill does a person bring to my group, right? And the skill could be things that you've learned. A skill could be a computational skill. It could be a skill that you've learned in a lab, a particular thing that you know how to do. It could be something that you built. It could be something that you've attended a couple of courses in Coursera or whatever. So somebody, for example, I want this to be done, and I'm looking for somebody who can parallelize a code or can amazingly write big programs in Python or whatever. And if you tell them that I am a Python programmer and I've been doing this for 5 years, then that person immediately starts flagging you as a so this is the kind of thing. So you tell them what you can offer to them. Apart from interest. Interest is a very important thing, but all the 50 people who've applied to them have said that they're very interested in this field. In addition, you tell them what are the things that you've learned, and in particular, what skills you have, and why those skills are important for the kind of things that you want to do. And you summarize this in 5 lines. Don't write a 3-page email to begin with. Nobody's going to read it. Okay? And then if they're interested, they'll reply to you and you can take it forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, really does. And the other question is that apart from UK, like from my particular interest topic, I have chosen some countries like Denmark and Finland and Italy. So I just wanted to know from your point of view that apart from the academic part, like about the society and for an Indian person, what is that country for a person coming from India? So I just wanted to know your point of view, particularly for
what are the countries? What are the countries you're talking about? Denmark,
Finland, and Italy.
And the third one? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Italy.
Oh, and Italy. Okay. Yeah. So I don't see a problem in general, country-wise. There is no problem at all. I see Indian students going to all these countries a lot. Northern European countries are generally very safe, and also and you can get around with your English there quite well. Finland, people are very, very good in English. Denmark also, they are very good, linguistically excellent. They all know about 4 languages. And these are places that have very good social structure, medical care, healthcare, everything is excellent. So I think Scandinavian countries and Finland would be excellent. Italy, you might have a problem if you are doing coursework, etc., with your language. But other than that, it depends on where you are. If you are in one of the labs, national labs, say in Bologna, or I'm Milan or one of the major universities, then absolutely no problem at all. I think you should. I don't see any political issues of an Indian working in one of the top Italian universities. Not a problem at all. But if you want to do coursework there, then many of these universities in Italy particularly will not offer you courses in English. So you have to check that.
Oh, okay. So actually, I think I'm quite lucky because the chosen course is actually in English taught. So probably that's good. And regarding like the present pandemic situation, do you think that it is going to affect anyway the higher studies in the European countries because like the GDP and all the economic issues are quite bad due to this COVID-19? So is this going to affect the foreign students in any way, like from job perspective or anything?
Very hard to say. Very hard to say. Now, I don't think it, it depends on long-term how things will go, how the economy will go. I don't know. I don't think you should think so far right now. I think the universities will find ways of coping with PhD programs and graduate programs, etc. right now. What Italy will look like in 5 years, I don't know. Nobody knows. So,
Yeah.
but I think you can, what will happen is that if you join next year in August, by that time, I think you will probably be able to fly there, and the way a lab works, etc., is going to be. I mean, Europe has done very well in adapting to the current situation, but there is nobody who can tell you how this current situation is going to affect you.
Yes, we would like to move on to other questions. So I can see Shotovisha has her hand up for a long time.
Also, I think Oishi wrote in the comment box with her question.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Ayushi.
Ayushi, yes. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah.
Ayushi.
So her question was, how do you compare between Indian institutes like TFR and Iisc for experience and further opportunities?
Physics students, good point. Actually, having now worked in all these countries and having come back to India, I think for an Indian student working in physics in any of the top Indian universities, say TIFR, IISc, as you mentioned, or even in my institution like IUCAA, the level of research and the quality of the PhD that you do here is only comparable to the top universities in the US or in Europe. I don't think somebody who's doing a PhD in a 100th ranked university in the US does a PhD any better than anybody in any of the top universities in India. So when somebody comes and asks me, a lot of people who from their childhood want to go to the US or want to go abroad for their PhD, and there's no way you can stop them. But we're getting into a situation where in the top Indian universities, the people who actually are doing PhD there are doing the same level, if not better work than in the middle ranking universities and some of the top universities in the US or all over Europe, right? And so actually the job prospects matters on the quality of your work and the quality of the papers you write. It really does not matter. I mean, the students who come out of my institution get postdocs and jobs in astronomy, my subject, as well as anybody who comes out of Cambridge or of Harvard. Right? They're competing on an equal ground. In fact, some of them have advantages that they have used some of the facilities. Like, for example, if they're a radio astronomer and they've used the GMRT, they have a better advantage than anybody who's done a PhD from Princeton, things like that. So I think we are getting to a stage where we can very confidently say that if you are actually going to a university that's not one of the top ranking universities, don't go. You're much better off doing your PhD here in India. Actually, I would say that for masters straight away. I do not recommend anybody to go to a master's program abroad. Master's programs should always be done in India, right? Master's programs abroad are all terminal programs. They don't lead to PhDs. No other country than India actually has a master's program that's a serious academic program. It's used only for switching fields or for a terminal program, which means that you don't want to do a PhD, you end in master's. So please do not go for master's programs abroad, unless you're changing your field completely. I have a friend who did his degree in electronics and he wanted to do Sanskrit grammar. And so he did a master's in Sanskrit. So that kind of thing you want to do, you can go and do, but don't do anything else. And for PhDs, be very careful in what you choose, because you're getting to a phase, and this will be even better in the coming years. An Indian top university, top institute PhD is treated at par with anybody who's got a degree from the UK or the US. So do not. So that should not be the sole reason. The reason should be that you want to work in a particular group on a certain subject. That's it. Okay.
Yeah. So we are in the last 5-6 minutes of the question, and we have questions on 2 related topics. A is, should we wait till our master's finish before starting the application? Yep. The second is, how specific does my research topic need to be when I'm writing my application? And the third is a slight unrelated question, which is, how common is art science as a topic in Europe, because it's not a very typical subject here?
I didn't get the last question. What did you just say?
So it's about art sciences. So how common is art sciences in Europe? Because it's not such a very common topic over here.
Earth sciences.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So your first question was about masters. I think I've given the answer to that already.
Yeah.
I think master's programs should be done here, and you should, as I said, start applying 18 to 12 months, that period, before your starting date in Europe, right? So if you're starting in August next year, you should have already started thinking about or writing about, preparing for your things now, because right now is about 12 months before. So this is when, so as soon as you get into your master's program, towards the middle of your first year, in your second semester, and certainly at the end of your second semester, you should start writing to people, researching scholarships, researching. So that's it. The second thing is, the second question you said is about how specific you should be in your SOP. What you said?
Yes. Like, do you have a project in mind?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Nobody wants to hear projects from you because they have their own ideas. I mean, if you have a project already, they don't want you, right? So what you have to do is you have to emphasize your skills, as I said. So you have to say, what general area you want to work in and what you have to offer to a group or to a person. Because, if, for example, there is a project and the project is totally well defined, then the person you're applying to would have done it already. They have a general area in which they've set up a certain project, right? And they want people to fill in certain slots to do things. And once you get there and if you pretend that you know all about that subject, then they don't want you. So from your side, you emphasize your interest in a general area, and in particular, certain areas in which you think you like. But as I said, all the 100 people who are applying will have also expressed interest. Interest is not a transferable item. What is important is that you then tell them what you know in that subject and what your skills are. And in particular, if you think that you have experience in doing this, this, and this, what you can offer. That is more important, I think, in writing this. Being very specific and saying, I want to work on such and such and such and such a project, and the headline of the title of my first paper will be this. Don't do that, because that's not how research works. Right.
Our last question is on the earth sciences.
So yeah, I don't know. I
prospect.
don't understand this question, because earth sciences now, in India, earth science is not called earth science, it's called geology, and in some cases environmental sciences, right? And what has happened in India is that earth sciences in the form of geology is taught in not many places, right? But most universities teach it. Kolkata University, for example, when I was a student, used to have only 2 colleges teaching earth science, geology, right? Or 3 colleges. And now that has broadened a lot. Now earth sciences is taught in various guises. And in Europe too, it's very specific in certain areas. But earth sciences actually encompasses a lot of things. For example, in many universities, Cambridge is a good example, where earth sciences covers environmental sciences and atmospheric sciences and stuff like that. In many cases, earth sciences covers a lot of planetary sciences. In fact, I'm a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. Astronomical Society has a geological division and an astronomical division. And so they all work together. So the geophysicists and the geologists, the earth sciences people actually work with astronomers, because planetary sciences comes under that. So you find a lot of universities would call an area earth sciences, but they're actually dealing with often other planets, and often the interior of the earth, and often the earth's atmosphere, right? So atmospheric sciences is very different. So I think that is the source of this confusion, if I understood your question correctly. And in India, a lot of this is actually subsumed under other departments. Like, for example, geophysics is taught under physics, mostly, rather than geology. And a lot of geology is taught in a subject where people think geology is about rocks, fossils, and things like that. Whereas earth sciences is a far more broad subject. Now, currently, it is a very fashionable subject because of climate change. And a lot of climate research and climate change is earth related, as well as the interaction between the earth and the atmosphere. And so atmospheric sciences and earth sciences work together for climate change. And this has become a very, very big thing. And so, and you would find that a lot of engineering universities, IITs, engineering colleges too, will have some of the courses that are being taught, which will be in environmental sciences and earth sciences as well. I hope that answered your question. I don't know whether I got your question right.
Yeah. Shatavisha, do you have anything to add? No, I think not. So
no, thank you. Okay, so my question was, I studied geology here, and after my BSc, so when I see people going for research-oriented institutions like Iisc or TIFRs, so we don't really have any research-oriented institutes that caters to the MSc students. We have to shift to the IITs, which is which mostly caters to the industry. So how is the situation in Europe? For example, if I'm doing a MSc over here, and if I want to be in the field of core geology, so is it would it be a good decision to stay in this field or venture out into the subjects that are more common, like atmospheric sciences or climate change?
What do you mean by core geology? I didn't understand.
The curriculum I am in offers the main geology subjects, like you said, rocks and fossils and interior of the earth. And atmospheric sciences are being treated as a different stream now. So does it make sense to? Does it make sense to?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. In India, is, you know, the main problem has been this big difference between the universities and the institutes, right? A lot of research happens in institutes, and nowhere is this any worse than in geology. Geology, the university departments of geology do not do much research. And as you rightly said, even in presidency, for example, a lot of our funding used to come from either ONGC or from the nuclear industry. And so the connection is with industry. Now, there is, of course, path-breaking research going on in India in institutes like NGRI in Hyderabad, or the ocean institutes in Goa. So you have the National Antarctic Survey Institute, which is now called National Polar Institute, or the NCPOR, and then the Oceanographic Institute, which actually runs the entire Antarctic, for example, and the oceans and the ocean beds and stuff like that. So a huge number of geologists work there. I am working currently with a lot of people in NGRI because we are doing a seismographic survey of this whole place in Maharashtra where we're going to put the gravitational wave observatory. And I see the amount of work they do on just the plate of the Deccan Plateau and its, you know, its characteristics and seismic studies and things like that. So there are a lot of very important institutes where you can do your PhD on classical geology, right? And then there are the fossils geology things, which are connected to a lot of the biology-oriented programs. IISc in Kolkata, surprisingly, has a lovely paleontology department, for example. But there are very good paleontology departments in a lot of these institutes, which are more biology-oriented. So the thing is to find good places. I mean, there are wonderful places in India where geologists are doing great work. I mean, I know some wonderful Antarctic and Arctic, you know, people who work both in the Arctic and the Antarctic, who do quite a lot of work there, and they're all geologists. Now, these guys work with people in Europe. For example, India has a station in the Antarctic. India has a station in Sweden, I think, in one of the fjords. And I've met quite a lot of people who come from Northern Europe, who work with the Indian institutes to work to do geological studies of the Himalayas, geological studies of the polar regions, Indians going there and working there and things like that. So you can get involved in this kind of stuff both in India and abroad. I think if you don't want to go into climate sciences, that is, of course, it's related. I mean, if you're working on the Antarctic, eventually you'll end up doing climate sciences because that's the future of the subject. But a lot of work happens in the institute. So you'll have to find the institutes rather than finding these departments within.
Okay.
All right, we're done.
Yes, I think I would like to thank all our panelists for spending a lot of time with us, and to all of you for coming here and asking the questions. In case you would like to share this with any of your friends or your students, this would be up in our YouTube channel. I would also recommend you to look at our Slack channel and be a part of it, because on 12th we have a talk, for example, from Anantada on GMRT, and we have many other things planned. So it would be good to see you coming, and that's it for today.